Afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Hill, I'm RAP's chair, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon on understanding how to reduce your hospitality and food service impact. I think we're all conscious what a difficult time this has been for the hospitality sector and still is a difficult time. So we're particularly pleased that you're able to come and join us and understand more about this subject. I think we're all conscious of the extent to which the whole COP26 process has put climate change to the top of, I think, probably most people's agendas now, and there is more and more demand being put on business to respond. And I think we're also very conscious as to the large extent that food waste plays and preventing food waste plays in reducing that impact. I'm sure many of you have heard the figures that if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter after the US and China. So we have a lot of work to do. Now, I'm very pleased that RAP is hosting this seminar, but it's not something we could do alone. We're doing it in collaboration with a range of other organisations. RAP, for those of you not familiar with us, is an international non-profit organisation. We work in more than 30 countries now, and illuminating the extent of food waste and the climate impact of food waste has been something that, as a data and evidence organisation, we have played a pivotal role in doing. But we're not just about data and evidence, we're about action too. So today's webinar is very much about how to take action. And it's very much for you in the sector to navigate your way amongst the different kinds of help that is available to you and choose the best route for you. And as I said, we have a number of brilliant organisations on board with us who are going to help us do that. So I just need to do a little bit of housekeeping slide now with you, which is that we are recording this webinar and we'll be able to share it on the Guardians of Grub website, which is one of the initiatives RAP has spearheaded. We're going to have some, feel free to make comments and ask via the Q&A, and we are going to have time for a Q&A session later on, and we will respond to as many questions as possible while we're doing that. Just to give you a sense of what we're going to cover today, just give you a quick sense of the agenda. We're going to have some insights from key speakers. We're going to lead off, though, before we get to do that, with a keynote speech from the Minister from Bays, Paul Scully, the Minister from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, who played a big role in trying to support the sector. And then those are our insight speakers you're going to hear from then. And then we've got an industry panel of really significant organisations who can share their experience and give you a sense of how it works on the ground. And then we'll have some Q&A and a little bit of a close. We've also got for you a little bit of insight through polling. So I think we're just going to share the first poll. You can tick more than one box. So I'll just pause a minute to let that come up and let everybody respond. So just to clarify, which one of these statements would you agree with, one or more of them? Okay, so interestingly, a large percentage of you, a majority of you with us, do see these greenhouse gas reduction as part of top 3 strategic priorities. And I think that's hugely significant. And as I was saying earlier, does show how far it's come up, I think, all of our agendas. And the rest of those results will be really helpful to us in helping steer some of the questioning later on. So thank you for that. We'll have another poll at the end, which will help to gain a little bit more insight around some of those topics. So I'm now going to move to, we have a presentation from Paul Scully, who's the Minister for Small Business, Consumer and Labour Markets in the Department of Business. He's going to tell us a little bit about the kind of support that the department is offering.
Firstly, I'd like to thank RAP for inviting me to speak today. It's a real pleasure to come and address you all. As you know, the UK is one of the most diverse and dynamic hospitality and food and drink sectors in the world. The British pub is not only a landmark, it's the hub that unites our communities. Our restaurants are recognised internationally as being some of the very best, and our nightclubs attract visitors from right the way across the world. After an incredibly difficult 18 months for hospitality, I've seen firsthand how so many of you have struggled despite robust government support. It's fantastic to see so many of you coming together to take robust action in order to reduce emissions. Your concerted efforts set an excellent example to other sectors and serve to strengthen the UK's position as a global climate leader as we embark on our year of the COP presidency. As we all know by now, the science is telling us that we as a planet must take substantial and immediate steps to cut emissions in order to limit warming. And that's why the UK has taken a huge position of global leadership by baking in a 2050 target into law. That's the very highest form of commitment. We've almost also promised to reduce emissions by at least 68% by 2030. If you think about that scale of reduction, it's genuinely amazing. Now, we know we can't get there without business, and noting that food systems account for around a third of global emissions, hospitality and food and drink businesses have a huge role to play. We need a sector that's both resilient against future shocks and able to bounce back quickly, as well as being able to adapt to ongoing challenges such as tackling climate change. Collaboration is key if we're going to see the pace of change that we need. And that's why we need initiatives like RAP's Call Told commitment, which is so vital. Earlier this year, government published its first ever hospitality strategy, which includes the commitment to help hospitality businesses and their supply chain to decarbonise, in addition to working with organisations like RAP to reduce waste and single-use plastic consumption. As part of this strategy, we've formed the Hospitality Sector Council to work with the sector by co-creating solutions whilst delivering commitments set out in the strategy, including developing a greener sector. Now, while it's true that most emissions come from food production, that means that hospitality businesses can make an even bigger impact by considering their supply chain, or Scope 3 emissions, in addition to their own direct emissions. The good news here that there's a lot of support available, much of which you'll be learning about today thanks to RAP and UKHospitality and the many other fantastic organisations speaking today. I'd also urge organisations on this call to join the race to zero if you haven't done so already. For businesses with 500 employees or fewer, you can do this by visiting the UK Business Climate Hub to sign up to the UN recognised Small Business Climate Commitment to access a range of fantastic resources to help you measure, reduce and report on emissions. Now, here businesses can also get help and advice on how to be greener and save money, including hospitality specific actions which RAP and the Zero Carbon Forum help to craft. So to conclude, we've got a huge task ahead of us, but also a huge opportunity. As our COP26 presidency unfolds and we look forward to the further achievements that we'll make, I thank you for all of which you're already doing and look forward to collaborating with you all during the next exciting year ahead.
Well, I think we've heard some really strong commitment and also offer of support there from our business department, which is, I think, going to be valuable to all of us going forward. Now, we're having a series of insights sessions, and I'm very pleased to introduce, first of all, Kate Nichols, who's CEO of UKHospitality, who's doing a presentation jointly with Mark Chapman from the Zero Carbon Forum, and they're going to tell you a bit about the carbon roadmap. So Kate and Mark, over to you.
Well, Julie, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kate Nichols. I'm Chief Executive at UKHospitality, which is the national trade body for hospitality businesses. So that is pubs, bars, restaurants, coffee shops, hotels, holiday accommodation, visitor attractions, from a single site independent operator right the way through to the national chain. And the hospitality sector, third largest industrial sector in the economy, with a large and complex supply chain. So we have two challenges when it comes to talking about sustainability and carbon net zero. The first is that around 80% of hospitality businesses themselves are small businesses, but then we have a supply chain which has many multiple links to it, and again is predominantly made up of small businesses. So I really wanted to be here today. We've worked very closely with RAP on food waste issues in the past, and we are a signatory to the Courtauld Commitment. And also we worked closely with the Prime Minister's Small Business Champion on Climate Change Hub that the Minister, Paul Scully, just referenced earlier today. And I think it's really important, given the size, scale, and the fact that hospitality has such a big footprint in touching our everyday lives as consumers, that we take a lead in this debate as we move forward. This is really an opportunity for a COVID reset moment. As we emerge from COVID, we need to ensure our recovery is sustainable in the broadest possible sense of the word, to ensure we can rebuild resilience in the eyes of consumers, employees, and investors. There's no doubt that hospitality has struggled as we've come out of COVID to be able to recruit again. And we know that this is a key component of our customer-facing brand, our employee-facing brand, that we as an industry need to be seen to playing our part and stepping up to the plate. And addressing this, as the Minister said, is a key part of our hospitality recovery strategy as we look to build back better post-COVID. The hospitality strategy is a unique document. We've never had one before within government. It is one of the silver linings to come out of COVID. Going into COVID, we didn't have a hospitality minister. We didn't have a hospitality unit within BEIS. We now have both of those. Paul is our very first hospitality minister, in addition to his other responsibilities. And he has worked tirelessly with us throughout the pandemic and beyond to look at the strategy we need to help this large part of the economy recover. And there are 4 strands to it: reopening, recovering, rebuilding resilience, and then delivering that renaissance. And it's that renaissance part, getting back to firing on all full cylinders, helping to deliver as a force for good in nudging consumer behavior and in changing business behavior and in influencing our supply chain, that the sustainability strand sits, and why it is so really important for us to be able to deliver. So you've got a hospitality strategy which has about 25 different initiatives underneath it, and it has 3 or 4 key work streams underneath it, one of which is a sustainability group. Now, this is something that we at UK Hospitality had taken seriously. We worked closely with Mark Chapman in the run-up to the hospitality strategy being published. We looked at sustainability in the broader sense, so packaging, plastics, food waste, sustainable transport, investment in green solutions. And that sustainability group has now been taken forward, rolled into a broader industry group sitting underneath the hospitality strategy to be able, as Paul said, to co-create solutions and to come forward with proposals to government about what the industry can do, where it might need more help, and in particular where that investment might be incentivised. On the specific tranche of work on carbon net zero and COP26, in the run-up to COP26, we worked closely with Andrew Griffith to look at making sure we had tips, techniques that could be taken forward, and we worked to establish the Carbon Net Zero Forum. And here is a sort of overview of why hospitality must act. 75% of UK CO2 emissions are from businesses, and hospitality is one of the biggest emitting sectors, not necessarily in our own operations, but because of that complex supply chain that sits behind us. As I said, it's that farm to fork piece and the large amount of emissions that come through the food and drink manufacturing process, delivery process, etc., that is so important. So that's why we have prioritised this within UK Hospitality. And I'm really pleased that our operators were also prioritising this, even at the depth of the COVID crisis, even when their businesses were not open. We were able to work with Mark and establish a Carbon Net Zero Forum to be able to look at what we could do to play our part in delivering COP26 pledges, and I'm very proud of the fact that we have industry pledges that are ahead of that government pledge, so 2030 in our own businesses, 2040 in our supply chain, and really it's coming back together. So what COVID taught us was that we could collaborate, we could achieve so much more as coming together as an industry, as sector, particularly with so many SMEs within the sector. If we came together, then we had the chance to develop solutions that helped to reduce business costs. It gave us a stronger footprint for accessing funding or getting better deals from energy providers. And it helped us to provide common compliance advice and support and guidance to help businesses comply with that legislation. And critically, when so much of our CO2 emissions are from our supply chain, that can only be delivered if we work collectively. It can't be solved individually. So it's an approach which stood us in good stead during COVID, and it's the key to tackling those issues going forward. And the idea behind our Carbon Net Zero Forum was that we could bring together some of the largest players and the industry trade bodies to work together to develop some solutions so that we could pass on tips and tricks to smaller players and smaller operators. So in the words of Dave Brailsford at Sky, many small number of incremental changes that don't make too much difference in and of themselves, when you put them all together, can deliver a huge step change in what the hospitality industry can do. And that final bullet point there, that it is the right thing to do for our sector as we move forward towards a sustainable recovery from COVID. So we worked closely with our leading operators and our sister trade bodies to be able to come together to develop a roadmap to net zero and to set out the ambition for operators. And I'm going to hand over to Mark, who's going to take you through the detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so the Zero Carbon Forum, yeah, we're a non-profit, non-competitive industry collaboration of the UK's leading hospitality and brewing operators, as Kate said, to design and implement a net zero roadmap for the sector and the companies in it. Working closely with UKHospitality and BBPA to support the sector to measure, report, reduce emissions to net zero, and working in partnership with them to engage government on the support we need to implement the changes and investments we need to make, as Kate outlined. We're also working together to pool resources, access expert talent, engage our suppliers, and really speak as one so we can get there much more quickly and efficiently than doing it alone. As Kate outlined, this year we've spent a lot of our time working and producing the roadmap to net zero. And the way in which we went about this was we used the consumption data and reduction initiatives of all of our members. So they pulled all of their information, and we combined that with expert input from our advisory board of Mike Berners-Lee and Mike Barry, and led by our consultants, Carbon Intelligence, and input from Carbon Architecture on the brewing details. So the roadmap details the key emission areas for operators and the initiatives and approach that they can take to reach net zero. And you can download a full copy of this from our website, the full roadmap. And as Kate mentioned, a number of our members have either committed to or even going ahead of the target timelines of 2030 for net zero for scopes 1 and 2 and 2040 for scope 3. With all of our members, they will be announcing their individual roadmaps by summer next year and are working on their own plans if they haven't done already. But I think perhaps more importantly, it's the individual and collaborative actions we're driving now, such as doubling the amount of renewable energy that our forum members are buying, that's delivering significant carbon savings right now and will continue to do, and we'll be announcing more initiatives in the new year. But just in terms of some of the key findings from the roadmap, I mean, one of the key ones and one of the great purposes of today is how much of our emissions sit in our supply chain, up to 97%, depending on the subsector of hospitality. So we can't reach net zero without collaborating with our supply chain. And the key activities we're driving through the forum in conjunction with partners like RAP will be to increase the uptake of food waste reduction programs like the great work that RAP's done on Guardians of Grub, menu changes to increase the amount of plant-based dishes, more local and sustainable sourcing of our food, and really engaging our suppliers in a consistent way, speaking as one to support the actions they're taking themselves and encourage them to take more action to reduce their own emissions. So collaboration is key. The roadmap sets out the reduction pathways to net zero, along with more detail on the reduction initiatives and how applicable they are to each operator. And we're using these findings to provide UKH with what it needs to engage government to provide us with the support we need to implement these initiatives at pace. Turn the roadmap into action at a company level. Through joining the forum, all of our members receive an individual company action plan. And this will detail what initiatives they can take across the 9 action areas from energy, packaging, waste and menu, along with best practices by function area. We'll also be announcing in the new year toolkits and carbon calculators for operators of all sizes, from independents to multi-site operators, to measure their footprint and understand priority reduction initiatives. The forum membership base is growing rapidly and we'll be announcing more in the new year, but in summary, it's made up of the leading pub, restaurant, hotel, QSR and brewery operators. On the company action plan, the common feedback from operators when looking to create a plan to reduce emissions is not knowing where to start. And the purpose of the forum is to enable operators of any size to understand what initiatives they should take. The action plan will be updated year on year with best practice. And it's also the place we'll be signposting great initiatives like RAP's Guardians of Grub to get the systematic adoption of it. I mentioned we'll be launching the Zero Carbon Calculator Toolkit in the new year, supported by UKH, to enable operators to measure their footprints through answering a series of questions and also providing them with all the initiatives they can take to reduce it and track that year on year. We've been working together with RAP just over a number of years, and these are some of the areas we'll be working together with RAP to decarbonise our supply chain, and it's great to be here today to support this event and look forward to continue to do so over the coming months and years. Finally, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Robert Swan about the greatest threat to our planet is the belief someone else will save it. We know through the forum and through the collaboration that we've got that we really can support operators of all sizes to design and implement their own net zero plans, and looking forward to working with RAP to achieve that.
Thank you very much, Mark and Kate, and we are really keen to work with you too, so thank you very much indeed, and apologies for hurrying you on. We're trying to fit a lot of organisation insights into quite a short space, and the presentations of course will be available on the Guardians of Grub website later on. So our next set of insights, I'm very pleased to introduce Kate Dranginis from Sustainable Restaurant Association and Johnny McCreesh from Net Zero Now, who are also going to do a joint presentation. Over to you.
Thank you so very much, guys. I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm Kate. My background's in hospitality, but then my education's been in climate change management as well. And I work now for the Sustainable Restaurant Association, who help hospitality venues of all sizes reduce their environmental impact. Their key way of doing this is through a rating framework that helps restaurants and other businesses focus in on where they need to reduce their impact. But we work closely with Net Zero Now as well, specifically with Johnny, who I'll just quickly let him introduce himself, and Net Zero Now as well.
Hello everyone, my name is Johnny McCreesh and I'm the climate specialist at Net Zero Now, involved in a lot of the hospitality sector that we're going to be talking about today.
So Net Zero Now is primarily aimed at small and medium businesses, but we've worked with independents right through to sort of national chains as well. And our aim is always to make the process of going net zero feasible but achievable. Feasible and achievable while being scientifically robust. We understand how busy hospitality is and how stretched it is, particularly at the moment. So we need to ensure that the process that we're giving is achievable, but any certification and claims of net zero also need to stand up to scrutiny. So the 4 steps that Net Zero take are calculate, mitigate, compensate, and communicate. Calculate being gathering all of your data and applying emissions factors to it. And with calculating, we include all 3 scopes. As Mark pointed out just now, we can't really claim to be net zero without including scope 3, especially in hospitality. And then going on to mitigation as well. That's where we reduce the impacts by looking at areas that we can reduce emissions. Compensation is looking into offsetting what we can't reduce. And communication is the key to spreading the word about net zero to other businesses, to staff, and to customers as well. So Net Zero Now, the process works through a platform, which is at go.netzeronow.org. The idea behind it is that businesses can easily put in the data that they've collected themselves and generate a footprint. The website's recently been updated to make it even more intuitive. So the basic process is the big blue button at the bottom. You click add, and then you can add anything in from your energy bills through to your sort of waste management data and all of your food data as well, employee commuting. You can put a date range in to make it nice and easy if you've got receipts for different dates as well. And then you eventually end up with what I like to call a reverse shopping list, which tells you everything you've bought in the past 6 months or year, which will then go through the calculation stages, and Johnny will run you through the rest.
And the important point to say at this part is that we've designed this platform specifically for small businesses. So this is enterprises with fewer than 500 employees, and to make it really accessible for people that maybe don't have a huge sustainability department or don't have the expertise already to find out their footprint. So it's a process that at the very minimum, we need a certain number of inputs of data, but that we understand that that can improve year on year, and that next year you'll have a little bit of a better idea of your footprint compared to last year. So I'm going to go on and show you what a report looks like when we create one. So this is an example of a large restaurant that we put through and got the report at the end of. There's about 1,000 tons of emissions, which is quite high, slightly on the high scale, of which about 3/4 are food, 20% operations, and 5% beverages. And down there, you can see broken down by category in each of those sections. And then we also benchmark your results against the average user or industry best practice. In here, you can see the operations breakdown. In particular, it's around 200 tons. The vast majority of operations for this restaurant, which is indicative of many restaurants, is gas and electricity. So this organization doesn't have 100% renewable tariff on their electricity. So we can see if you go for the easy win of a renewable tariff, you can take that away, and then you're left with fewer and fewer emissions. And we've just done this so you can see what the other emissions are, such as waste and transport fall into this category. For most restaurants, their scope 3 emissions, and in particular food, is going to be the biggest part of their footprint. You can see this restaurant has a huge amount of meat in their emissions, followed closely by seafood, dairy, all the other items that they've put into the calculator to show. So we show you that general pie chart. We break it down by category. We can compare UK beef with rest of the world beef, which will have a slightly higher emissions. Beverages is quite similar, and I'm going to skip past this easily. At the end of it, we want to show you, as well as food, drink, and operations, we show it in scope 1, 2, and 3. And as Mark said before, scope 3 is the biggest section of about 82% in this. Finally, we set some targets. We want people to make reductions immediately. So we have a basic 15% reduction in the next few years. You can increase this if you want. That's for scope 1 and 2. And then for intensity emissions, which is across all 3 scopes, we have another reductions target there in terms of intensity. And now I'm going to go on and show you some of our recommendations in more detail. And so this is some of the suggestions that we come up with in terms of how to mitigate your actions. So based on your report, these are automatically generated, and you're told if you do reduce electricity use by 15%, this is the estimate of what your large restaurant could save per cover, and your intensity emissions per 1,000 turnover. So we have a load of these that are generated automatically. Also, if you're working with the SRA and Food Made Good, they can suggest more detailed recommendations to reduce your own footprint. We have online the Net Zero Pubs Climate Action Playbook, which is for pubs, bars. We have one for restaurants, which is full of useful recommendations that all types of businesses can use. Obviously, it's not specific because you can't get a specific recommendation until you've done your footprint, but it's a really useful playbook that will be handy, and you can download that for free on our website, and it will be shared after this video. Just quickly to show you the plan of Net Zero, our trajectory. We say straight away, if you want to be part of Net Zero now, you need to start reducing your real emissions. And so this happens, and this is a good continuous process that goes on and on until 2050 or beyond, as you're trying to reduce to absolute zero. We have reductions from year 1, and then we talk about compensation for the same amount that your residual emissions are. And this will hopefully reduce over time as your emissions reduce over time also.
So yeah, once you've gone through all these stages, the final one is to communicate, and we provide sort of graphics to go with that. So whether you're a net zero accredited business now or a net zero at a certain date, such as 2025, you're on the road to it. We give you certification that you can advertise as well. We also provide sort of posters like this that you can use in staff rooms or offices, so you can communicate with your staff why you're becoming a net zero business, how it will affect the business, and how it might affect their role as well. And this gives you a chance to sort of chat with customers about why you're doing it. And there's a lot of data out there now around customers being more and more interested in businesses with sustainable practices, and also around staff retention as well. So it's becoming the hot topic of the moment.
I'll just quickly answer a question that we got, which was about emissions factors. So we get our emissions factors from the UK government list of emissions factors. That's mostly operations. For our food and drink, we get that from a range of academic research or surveys that are used. For example, PER and Nemetschek, which is used by the World Resource Institute. And there's lots more information about our emissions factors in our added info, which will be sent out to you afterwards.
This is a lovely quote from one of our early pilot groups as well, Peach Pubs from Hamish. We serve 1 million meals a year, and if we can get conversations around climate change at the table or bar, it will change the world. And I think that's really poignant, thinking about just how big the hospitality industry is in the UK. And I'll just wrap up by saying the most important thing at the moment is definitely to get your carbon footprint, because you can't reduce what you haven't measured. So however that happens. But yeah, we'll answer more questions, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Right, we're now going to go to WRAP's own Karen Fisher, who's Head of Climate Action Strategy. We've heard quite a lot about tools for looking at greenhouse gas emissions generally, but we're now going to look specifically at the role of food waste reduction, which, as we said at the outset, is really one of the big wins. So Karen, over to you.
Thanks very much, Julie. So I was actually going to start with a tiny bit of wider industry context and what we think this means in terms of priority for hospitality and food service businesses, and then move on to how reducing food waste can help you on the journey to net zero, and how Guardians of Grub tools can help. Context for our work is a new target we've agreed within the Keynote commitment to halve the emissions linked to the food and drink we consume in the UK by 2030. And that's a nearer term milestone, but it's a really important one on the pathway to net zero, because I think it's widely agreed that the next 10 years are critical to keeping to 1.5 degree trajectory. And we need that kind of level of absolute emissions reduction in that kind of timescale. So we wanted to understand, actually, could we collectively achieve this? And this specifically, could we achieve this by adding up all the commitments and policies that have been made today? Will they add up to this level of outcome? And we've done a big piece of work on that, which we published recently, and we'll circulate the link to. This is essentially, in a nutshell, the outcomes which really told us, actually, those things do add up and we can get there. But really importantly, all of the things listed on this slide here, all of these actions really do matter. There's no silver bullets here. Actually, what we have to do is deliver all these things and deliver those together. And in terms of what that means by way of priority actions for hospitality and food service specifically, it is pretty much kind of along the lines or echoes what's been said before by Mark and Johnny and Kate and others. It's really important to continue to focus on decarbonisation of your operational emissions, so things like energy, refrigerant, heat, transport. And it was brilliant to hear about all those resources available, and there are some others, and we'll share these links afterwards. What's even more important, as everyone has been saying, is getting a grip of your supply chain emissions, which is really hard, but the tools that we've heard about today will be really helpful in getting started on this challenge. And then the work that we've been doing within Keynote specifically has been much more around improving consistency, levelling the playing field, improving access to information across the industry. Because retailers and manufacturers really do share the same challenge on supply chain emissions. And ultimately, actually, we all need the agriculture sector to deliver. So we've been very much working with them as well to understand their barriers, blockers, and what can help unlock those reductions in agricultural supply chains. And I'd say actually a key take home today is that if you've got a net zero target, which includes your supply chain, which it should, you don't have to deliver those emissions yourself. Actually, it's a collective effort, and there are others that have got skin in the same game. The third point here is around deforestation in supply chains, which is similarly a challenge and a really importantly growing area and topical area. We don't have much time to cover it today, but we'll circulate some links on this after the webinar as well. Understand your influence on consumption behaviours. We've talked about a little today, and there's some really great examples of this kind of work happening, which I know we'll come on to in the panel. And then reducing food waste. So put this at the bottom, but actually really probably should be at the top, because it's a near-term, low-hanging fruit, no regret, win-win action. And so I wanted to explain a bit about how reducing food waste will contribute to your net zero objective. So firstly, this is a somewhat simplistic representation here, but essentially we have purchases coming in to hospitality and food service operation, and they carry all of the emissions linked to their production. And then you have the useful outputs from those inputs, so meals and beverages served, any surpluses that are diverted to useful purposes. And then any food that is wasted will result in emissions from disposal, and these will vary dependent on the disposal route, landfill being the largest source of waste disposal emissions, but relatively small. In comparison to the emissions linked to producing that food in the first place, so producing the food that you then throw away, that's where the majority of emissions associated with food waste lie. So it's much more up in the embodied emissions space. So if you reduce food waste, obviously you reduce the emissions, you avoid the emissions from waste disposal. The other thing, if you reduce food waste, is you also reduce your purchased goods emissions, because you need less inputs to produce the same outputs. So you can lower your purchased goods scope 3 emissions, and you can actually maximize this by focusing on higher embodied impact items like meat and dairy. So that's probably where you'll realize most savings. There is a grey area in accounting approaches for surplus, for example, sent to redistribution. The theory is, and those will avoid production of equivalent items, so the alternative need to purchase that food and produce that food, but there's quite a lot of uncertainty on how to do that. So at the moment, you can't currently include that in your scope 3 accounting. So it's the other areas that will count. So that's the theory. How to bring this to life for your organisation and realise savings from food waste reduction in your organisation. The first step really is understanding how much food is wasted. That's critical. Then you can overlay the GHG data for embodied and disposal emissions. And then you can also add in cost savings data to aid the cost case for investment. And that's where the Guardians of Grub content really comes into its own. And Eleanor's just going to briefly chat through the content we have there that can help.
Just running through what we've got to offer with our Guardians of Grub campaign. It's all about helping the hospitality and food service sector to feed people, not bins. So as Karen said, a great way to make a difference is understanding how and where your food waste is happening. A really important way to do that is to visualize and see that as a team. So we've got all of our tools are free and the courses are free. I just wanted to highlight a couple of courses we've got. The first is our 15-minute cost saving skills course. That gives you all the tools you need to target, measure and act. It's a really straightforward course, and it takes you through all of the tools that we've got with case studies and anecdotes and so forth. And right now you can register for our free online course called Becoming a Champion. And this is a behaviour change course. So it's a one-stop shop for professionals in the UK. to develop their skills and learning around reducing food waste. And we've got knowledge checks, certificates, and evidence-based data reporting. So working together as a team is really effective, and it's that team input that makes the change happen. It's all of that passion, innovation, creativity, and artistry to really find the solutions to where waste is ending up in the bin and how you can resolve tackling that and making a difference. So all of the reports include carbon impact as well as cost savings as well. And we ran a cohort from September 2020 to April 21. And during that very disruptive stage, we even saw fantastic savings during that. So between 23% and 38% reduction, depending on 8-week cohort audit period. So if you'd like to register for that course and find out more, please do reach out to us at the email address there. So what we'd really love you to do is give 15-minute cost saving skills course a go. If it's right for your business, the right time, then please register for our January cohort for becoming a champion and find out how much you can save carbon and financially. And we'd love you to also share and celebrate your success by finding out more about our partnership program that we'll be launching in the new year. So please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. And it's only by collaborating that we can collectively feed people, not bins. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karen and Eleanor, very much indeed. And our final piece of insight, I'm going to turn to Will Nicholson from the Food Foundation, who's going to tell us a bit about what investors are looking for. Which again is an increasing field, investor interest in net zero. So Will, over to you.
Thanks, Julie. Hi everyone. So I work at the Food Foundation. For those of you who don't know the Food Foundation, we're a charity based in the UK, obviously, and we work towards the ultimate goal that healthy and sustainable food and diets will be affordable for everyone. So we do a lot of work in food poverty and healthy and sustainable diets. Specifically, I run our Plating Up Progress work, which benchmarks a number of the UK food businesses in the downstream sectors, so retail, contract catering, quick service, casual dining, and a little bit of wholesalers. We tend to lean towards the PLCs, but not only PLCs, and we benchmark against metrics to do with climate change, health and nutrition, biodiversity, food waste, and so on and so forth. In order to do that, what we really do is we collaborate with people like WRAP and with other organisations to make sure that we're using recognised and accepted metrics. One of the reasons we do this, and this is why I'm really here to talk to you, is we engage with investors because they're quite interested and increasingly interested in what's going on. So just a potted history of why investors care about this. Investment risk and opportunity around sustainability and especially climate change has obviously been much more on the agenda in the finance sector over the last 10 years or so. And food and agriculture is becoming more recognised as a risk factor and also as an opportunity. So plant-based proteins and things like that. It's been lagging a little bit behind fossil fuels. I think we can probably all agree on that. But we have seen increasingly links between health and nutrition and climate change are becoming more accepted, which starts to bring investors into being interested in healthy and sustainable diets, which loosely speaking translates into the food that you guys sell. And investors are realizing that engaging with businesses and engaging with governments is going to be needed for food system change. In the same way as it is for fossil fuels. Nobody thinks that you could just engage with oil companies and expect climate change to go away. Investors for years have engaged with governments on fossil fuels. They're beginning to dip their toes in the water when it comes to engaging with governments on food issues. So you will see things like mandatory reporting in the National Food Strategy being supported, being supported by investors. They are also themselves getting demands placed on them to show their sustainability credentials. So if they've got holdings in food businesses, they need to know that the food businesses themselves are heading to net zero, because otherwise as investors they can't claim that. And that actually starts to reach people as well, because if you think about your pensions, so Make My Money Matter is a lead organisation on that in the UK, where they're striving for net zero pensions. So food is on the agenda. Just some really simple examples of that. So a real whistle-stop tour. There are loads of initiatives now that focus directly on investors. So the FAIR initiative, which is Farm Animal Investment Risk and Return, primarily looks at the retail and fast food sector and what they call protein producers, so livestock companies really, but they've got a huge investor following. So they use a lot of investor pressure on businesses to create change. The Climate Action, Climate 100 Plus, which is the sort of the biggest global climate change investor organisation, have started to include food and beverage sector specifics, and that's quite a new thing. Just this week, we worked with a group of investors in the UK to write to the government in support of the National Food Strategy's recommendation for mandatory reporting on healthy and sustainable food sales, which will, if it comes to fruition, impact most of you. There's a key metric in there that's around fruit and vegetables and around protein shift, so selling more plant-based proteins. That's obviously tied in with climate change. So things are moving quite quickly now. Just something a bit more sort of specific and practical. So the work we do at Plating Up Progress, we look specifically at different dimensions for food businesses. So here I'm just showing the average of the companies we look at, and you can see on climate change. For those of you with a sharp eye, you'll see that supermarkets are outperforming the out-of-home sector a little bit on climate change. That's primarily because the supermarkets have got a little bit further on Scope 3 emissions. As we know from all the conversations today, Scope 3 is now much more on the agenda for our sector in the hospitality space. So we would expect that gap to close. So what we're seeing is investors are interested in Scope 1 and 2, but they're also now interested in Scope 3. So they're going to be expecting companies to have data on Scope 3. More importantly, they're looking for implementation plans around that. And that actually means not just having a net zero plan and some data, but also showing what are you doing about biodiversity? Are you sourcing from areas that are at risk of deforestation? What are you doing about food loss and waste? Karen's just spoken about that, obviously. And what are you doing about your sales? Are you shifting your sales towards more, let's call it climate smart food? These are all key ingredients that will support your net zero claims. And investors are starting to catch on to it. So expect them to ask you about these things if you do have investors. So just sort of the bigger picture, just to summarize a little bit, because I know I've whizzed through quite a lot of this. Often when we talk about investors, people mean equity investors. So we're talking about shares, really. And that's where a lot of the work has been happening to date. Increasingly they are expecting to see net zero targets that include Scope 3 and implementation plans, as I've pointed out. But also there's fixed income investors are wising up to this as well. So that's about corporate bonds and things like that. And it's not just PLCs. So not all the companies that we look at in the Plating Up Progress work at the Food Foundation, the PLCs, not all of you will be PLCs, but you will all have a bank, and some of you will have overdrafts, and a lot of you will have loans. And what we're starting to see is much more consideration of this in the broader access to finance space. It's not going to jump out at us straight away, but we are starting to see already that banks are starting to consider how they build sustainability into overdrafts, loans, interest rates, and so on and so forth. So it will come. So if you're ahead of the game, you'll be well positioned. And it's going to be global and local. The benchmarking world is a global one and a national one. We're expecting to see local authorities start to pay more attention to this. There's a lot of work on city food policy, where license to operate may well start to become dependent on what you're doing about things like climate change. And all of this is going to start to weave into the financial spectrum of where your capital comes from. So investors are starting to wise up. They're starting to engage with governments. That changes the game completely, to the point that I made earlier about investors engaging with governments on mandatory reporting as part of the National Food Strategy in England. I would expect investors to start engaging with government around Scope 3 emissions as well, particularly relevant, as we know, for food. And I would expect as a knock-on effect of that, food systems to become a more important part the climate change talks, COP27, 28, 29, and so on, because in COP26, it didn't quite get there. It appeared in different pieces, but there wasn't a sort of a joined up approach to food systems and climate change in Glasgow. I think those days are going to change. So if you can get into a position where you're able to quantify your scope 3 emissions and report against them, you're going to be on the right side of all of those shifts. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Will, and to all the speakers. We've now got an excellent panel from a representation across the industry. So I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. And I've also got an initial question and an initial few questions for the panel. But if you've got any questions at any point whilst they're speaking or anything that comes to mind, please do continue to drop it into the Q&A, and we'll continue to try and answer either within a box, or I'll draw it into the conversation. So first off, and I'll go to each of the panel in alphabetical order by organisation, I'm really interested to know what net zero means for your business, your organisation, and how high a priority is it within the organisation. So firstly, if I could come to you, Lee, from Apetito.
Afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I'm Lee Shepherd. I'm Corporate Affairs and Policy Director at Apetito, and I'm our exec lead on all sustainability issues. What does net zero mean for us? I think it's perfectly aligned to our purpose as an organisation. As well as a food service business, we supply an awful lot of food to the elderly and the vulnerable in care homes, hospitals. So our mission is about making a real difference. So net zero works perfectly with that. How important is it within our organisation? It sits as one of our 4 core values. I think it's absolutely at the heart of what we do. I think it's embedded within our staff because of our purpose. And I also think, and I think this is really critical for industry to get hold of, is that people have seen that you can create real competitive advantage in this space as well. And by leading rather than following. So there is a social benefit to this. We all understand that. But there's also a business benefit to it as well. And I think getting the why right for each organisation is key to driving progress here.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And Julie.
Hello everyone, Julie Alst, Head of Sustainability at Bidfood. So what net zero means for us? So we are a huge supplier to lots of different food service and hospitality outlets, ranging from large and small ones. And we recognise that we have a key role to play in terms of helping them reach net zero, because as we all know, scope 3 emissions are absolutely huge and very, very significant in this area. In terms of Lee's point about driving progress, we've committed to a science-based target. We're still drawing up our baseline. It's been really complex and it's taking time, but we're hoping to give our customers reassurance that we're doing this in a very robust way, because there's a real sort of wild west out there in terms of net zero commitments. And if we're aligned to the science-based targets, our customers can be assured that we're doing this properly. So it's definitely ranked up the priority list in the last 2 years, and in a way that you wouldn't believe.
Thanks, Julie. Yes, I think that would chime with a lot of people, the Wild West comment. Over to Carolyn.
Hi, thanks, Karen. Nice to see you all. My name's Carolyn, and I am the Director for Delivery of Net Zero for Compass Group UK and Ireland, which basically means that I've signed up, along with a lot of other talented folk, to no sleep for the next 8 years. And I think it's fair to say that many of us increasingly feel, I'm sure not just at Compass, but across the industry, that I couldn't work for Compass if we hadn't made the commitment that we have, which is to reach a climate net zero position by 2030. And I think there's a rising national consciousness now, which COP26 has really helped with, particularly this year. So from an emotional perspective, it's around using the amazing hospitality industry that we have, so that food can be a vehicle to accessing some of the information that we all need to have in order to be able to make better decisions. And I feel really passionately about the fact that given the scale and the size we are, we have a role and a responsibility, which is increasingly a very serious obligation. And then I think the other side of it is really, as has been touched on already throughout this afternoon, that as well as being an environmental imperative, it's a commercial one too. And we are in the face of existential threats which fundamentally affect the systems we rely on to trade. And so, again, in the spirit of speaking with real candor, none of us would be profitable if we had to pay for the unpriced natural capital we exploit. So whether we choose to see it in moral, environmental, social or commercial terms, it's a priority that has to rank right up there, and it has to be anchored on climate science and the real talent of super smart people, of which I think the hospitality industry has many. So it's a great privilege to be here, Karen. Thanks for inviting me.
Excellent call to action there, Carolyn. And I'll hand over to Johnny.
Tough to follow. So yeah, I mean, net zero for us is a key strategic pillar. And sorry, I'm Johnny Lockett for Pizza Hut Restaurants. My role is to lead the sustainability strategy for Pizza Hut restaurants in the UK. And yeah, we're on the process of setting a science-based target. Absolutely sign up to what Julie said earlier. We feel that you can only do that by having those assurances that it is something that you haven't made up yourself. We're trying to do the right thing. Somebody else needs to be validating what we think is the right thing to do. And also, it'll mean that it has an effect. It actually makes a difference. It's measurable over a period of time. Sustainability is one of our key strategic pillars. We want to reduce our impact. And I really like what Hamish said earlier, or that quote of Hamish's earlier, really about hospitality being, and I'm paraphrasing, a vehicle really to carry a message. We can influence millions and millions of people annually, and if we can show some of the easy things that people can do to make a difference, then hopefully others can take that on as well.
Thank you. Last but no means least, hand over to Simon.
Hello, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Simon Mussett. I'm Head of Environmental Sustainability for Sodexo UK and Ireland, and primarily responsible for leading on our net zero journey across the region. So I think very similar to everyone else on the panel, really, I think, protecting the planet and taking climate actions, sort of integral to everything we do as an organisation. It's really been at the forefront of our business strategy, really, for over sort of 50 years. And we've been monitoring and tracking our sort of carbon emissions for well over a decade now. So I guess it's not something new to us, but I guess the whole package around net zero, it's kind of a more recent term, and it's a massive sort of priority for us as an organisation. I guess from a growth enabler perspective, I think a lot of our clients are expecting us as an organisation to be making progress around our climate impact. We're also seeing the government as well. So when we're bidding for government contracts now, we've got the new PPN 0621 that's sort of placing a requirement for organisations to have net zero commitments. So there's that whole growth enabler perspective piece. But there's also everything we do is within the business has an impact on the climate. So it needs to be a priority. There needs to be a step change in absolutely everything we do across all activities in our operations to really sort of decarbonise all of our activities. And like sort of others on the panel as well, we are looking at setting science-based targets. So we have in the region set a near-term target that's been validated by the SBTI of a 55% reduction by 2030, and we are looking to achieve net zero no later than 2045, and very much aligning a lot of our commitments and targets with the SBTI to ensure that I guess we've got that transparency and authenticity in this space.
Thanks, Simon. And just another line of question here. I wanted to get under the skin of some of the practicalities here, and to come to Julie first, because you've often challenged me in terms of where do you start on scope 3 emissions, and I wonder if you've reached any kind of decent conclusions on that, and whether you think your organisation as a wholesaler distributor kind of faces any unique challenges here?
Yes, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question because our customer base is really varied. So we have some customers that are really pushing us to make progress on this really speedily and far faster than the data actually exists. And then we've got other customers who recognise that their customers aren't quite as interested as others. So there's a very varying business case across our different customer base in terms of who's driving progress in this area. We are having to go to external consultants to help them to help us get data on our products and our scope 3. I won't pretend that it's easy to do. It's really complex, it's expensive, so we haven't really solved this question yet. And also we're just really aware that we've got about 1,200 suppliers, lots of whom are SMEs, which are really good from a kind of social value, using small local suppliers point of view, but they just don't have the resources like larger suppliers for providing data, etc. So that's a huge challenge. And we know that our progress in this area is going to be very dependent on our suppliers engaging with us, cooperating with us. So I don't know whether I've really answered the question, but it gives an accurate picture of where we are at in this, because I'm not pretending it's easy.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And it fundamentally isn't, which is why we have to work together on this as well. And just coming back to you, Simon, first, and then Carolyn, actually, in terms of you've both recently announced strategies, and I'm interested to know how you've kind of got those through the organisation and developed the practical plans that you've announced.
Yeah, so I guess you know, in Sodexo, we've, as I mentioned, we've been on a journey for a number of years. So I guess we started back in 2010. We actually had a partnership with the WWF, so we brought them on board to really help us with the really the measurement and reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions. So there was, I guess, you know, we started off by very much focusing on our direct sources, so, you know, around our scopes 1 and 2. And then in 2017, we then created a baseline across all of our scopes, so scopes 1, 2, and 3, and they helped us, you know, develop a tool, particularly to calculate a lot of our supply chain emissions, which looks at a lot of our, you know, the scope 3 categories. So that really helped us set that baseline to really understand where we are as an organisation. And then we set our first science-based target back in 2019. That was for a 34% reduction against the 2017 baseline. And within the UK and I region, we actually achieved that last year. So that's why we've kind of gone on and set further targets in our net zero journey. So continuing that alignment with the SBTi, alignment with climate science, and that 1.5 degree trajectory, we've gone and set an additional near-term target. So that is the 55% reduction by 2030. And then we want to achieve net zero no later than 2045, but having fully decarbonised our whole business. So we want to achieve at least a 90% reduction across all of our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. But as well as that, we've actually set ourselves a target of being carbon neutral by 2025. So we really want to sort of, in effect, I kind of call it our hygiene factor. So it's the stuff that we can fully control, the stuff that we can fully manage, the electricity that we're consuming, our vehicles, and the heating of our buildings to reach carbon neutrality by 2025. So they were the targets and sort of the commitments that we've made. And then I guess in terms of developing that roadmap, you know, I guess having measured our emissions for well over a decade now, we understand where those large footprints are. We know it's in our supply chain. We know it's at our client sites. So the energy we're consuming at our client sites, as well as the waste, the organic and the material waste. So then we can set those initiatives and commitments to start reducing the emissions associated with those categories. So that's why we've looked at things like, you know, tackling food waste, looking at eliminating single-use plastics and switching to more plant-based diets. And then also, obviously, the responsible sourcing piece, which will be, you know, critical in reducing those supply chain emissions. So yeah, it's been quite a long, sort of complex journey. I think sort of bringing our exec and along the process with us has been quite interesting, and I think having our communication team on board as well has been really critical to ensure that we're getting the messages correct, both internally and externally.
Yeah, thank you. And has that been a similar finding for you, Carolyn? Have you got any words of wisdom on some of the practical delivery challenges here?
I mean, I guess I'll let you be the judge on the wisdom part, Karen, but I think, we all, I guess, collectively are aware of the findings that increasingly are shared unequivocally from the likes of the IPCC and the report that came out earlier in the year. And I think the commitment that we made was anchored on the understanding that's been shared about the urgency to act and the need to do so across all three scopes. So with us, again, in the spirit of being really transparent, the commitment is climate net zero by 2030. In excess of 88% of our emissions sit within scope 3. We have in excess of 3,000 different ingredients that get distributed to in excess of 6,000 locations across the UK and Ireland. So the kind of tangled web of a supply chain that also needs to withstand all sorts of other pressures that have been, I think, implied throughout this afternoon is not to be underestimated. So I like, Julie, the candour with which you were talking, because I think it would be totally remiss of all of us to say that we could advocate really clear solutions tomorrow. But what we're really dedicated to finding is the kind of practical applications that exist at a site level that allow operators to really take charge of enacting some of the things that otherwise are at risk of being quite theoretical and quite lofty and sometimes exist in a C-suite, whereas actually what we really need to do is empower the army of 44,000 people that we have. So with that in mind, we've got 5 sort of distinct sectors across the public and private sector, and the range of services that we cover, including the food, but also the additional sort of FM provision, mean that we've got a split now in terms of the emissions attributable to each of the sectors. And the way in which we've been able to do that, again, just being really open, is because we've had phenomenal support from South Pole, who are our climate consultants, and a range of academics and partners that have been really radically generous in the expertise they've shared. So I think, there are a lot of us who are really, really keen to push this on. And as Karen said, and as many, and Kate too, we won't be able to do it unless we really enlist specialist expertise to deep dive into the areas which carry the greatest opportunity for an impact. So in the spirit of trying to summarize a little bit, I think, yes, I suppose all of us would share a very similar sort of slightly tortured, privileged, agonized journey that will no doubt continue. But for us, the sort of key starting points have been, absolutely, we've got to, basically, it's like money. I mean, you wouldn't ever dream of advocating where you spend your money unless you actually understood it. So you have to really have a feel for what that looks like. We've got sort of 5 areas where we started to tackle based on the fact that they represented key hotspots. Won't surprise anyone listening, I'm sure, that dairy was right up there. And so it's really just trying to be very clear and open with the fact that in the absence of having a wonderful silver bullet to be able to be shared, what we do have in our gift is increasing evidence that we just need to be able to act on. And I guess the other part, which I touched on at the beginning, is to lean into the very brutally tricky conversations that have to be had around rewiring supply chain economics, because I think there's a very real, I guess, path that we all need to tread in support of one another that realizes the true cost of the things that we're procuring, and therefore the investment that needs to go into adapting the way that's produced. So in that complicated web, we just really want to be a conduit. And I think the word force for good was used, which can sound a bit sort of trite and cliche, but I do really believe that that is what this is ultimately all about, is what are the paths and steps? How do they fit together? How can we unlock the finance in order to be able to achieve those, and see that all as fitting together? So I hope that helps, Karen. I mean, we could all talk for about 15 hours, I think, about this. We still have more to say, but.
Well, indeed. And actually, I was going to come to Johnny next and then to Lee, but firstly to John, and then start answering some of the questions in the Q&A, which also, if you see any you can answer, please do, given that we've got limited time. So yeah, Johnny, just because you first, to some of the points that have been raised, and I know you've been on this journey for a little while, interested to know if any of this really chimes, and what that has meant, your journey so far has meant for your next steps.
Yeah, so I think it's been said, none of this is easy. It'd be foolish to think that there's an easy solution for it. But I think what I've heard so far is everybody's taken the steps to really understand where their impacts are, and to try and identify then areas where they can really make a difference. And as a business ourselves, we have around about 50% of our scope 3 emissions being food. And we don't produce the food in agricultural practices. We have to buy that in. But what can we do to influence it? How can we work as an industry to collaborate to improve the agricultural practices that can help to reduce the emissions? How can we identify ingredients of the future? How can we work with direct suppliers to improve their own practices, or for them to set targets to reduce emissions? I don't think any business can really do that by themselves. I think it has to come from everybody trying to work together. It's always about measuring first. You really have to understand, even in that instance, well, what is the state of play? We might be surprised to find suppliers are actually doing more than they tell us about. We might be finding that suppliers are already working with other businesses that are also asking the same questions. And then it's about that consistency piece. Ask the question once, hopefully everybody can benefit from it. Show intent, influence, lead, and hopefully everybody else can benefit from that as well.
Yeah, good points. And actually that kind of lead and then help smaller businesses follow is a question in the Q&A. If anyone might like to attempt an answer, I'll come back to. Firstly, Lee, and I've seen also Julie that you wanted to answer one of the questions in the chat. Lee, two things, because your organisation's kind of in quite a unique space with a diverse range of customers, but also I know you've been doing some really interesting work with NHS as a customer. I'm really keen to know how that has played out.
Yeah, so the NHS have got a really strong net zero commitment, and we're a big supplier. So I certainly don't claim that we're an expert in this, and I think in many ways we've made this up, like most of us have, as we've gone along to try something. But looking at the footprint of our meals, we did some work launching some reduced carbon menus into the NHS. So we've designed some menus that they've got to be cost neutral because the NHS is tight on budget, so you can't increase cost. But we've introduced some menus that will reduce carbon by up to 20%. And the key learning for us, I suppose, on that was sort of small changes to menus can actually make quite a large difference. I was really sort of aware that if you're in hospital for 3 days, you're having an operation, you're probably not feeling at your best. If you're a committed red meat eater, that is probably not the time where you're going to turn plant-based. So I thought, well, it's pointless just completely tearing apart the menu. So we've done little things around, we've introduced for our footprint a lot more white meat to replace some of the red meat because that significantly reduces the footprint. We've also looked at menu design. So chicken dishes appear at the top of the menu rather than below the beef. And then some simple messaging for patients around the new menus. And that's made quite an impact without, I feel, being all that radical in terms of ingredients. It's only in 5 hospitals at the moment. It's very early days, but the engagement with staff and patients has been really strong so far. And I would sort of stress that. I think for all of us, none of us feel like the experts. I think when we talk to people in our supply chain, I certainly thought that many of our large suppliers would know more about carbon footprint than we did. I'm finding that they don't. Many of these conversations are literally happening for the first time. So I think we've got to collaborate amongst us to share this. But don't use that as an excuse not to just try some stuff. I think, small changes make a big difference. And that's really the message that I want to get across.
Yeah, I think that's a great message and the getting started point. Yeah, thank you. And Julie, I know you were keen to answer one of the questions in the chat, and I wondered if you might also have a few words on how you've been approaching the food waste question.
So no, on the question about somebody posed a question about asking a hotel venue for the carbon footprint of their event, and they gave an answer about the unavailability of data and data privacy. I just wanted to say, I don't know about data privacy, but I certainly would want to reassure them that I think the response that they don't have the data is totally genuine, because they would be, I mean, it'd be a hugely complex exercise mapping the carbon footprint of the event, from the commuting of everybody to even the manpower to provide the event, not to mention the carbon footprint of the food. So I just wanted to put their mind at rest that actually I think it's a genuine, it's not just a get out. I would think they would really struggle with the data for that, unfortunately. I don't know if anyone else has got any. Yeah,
definitely agree on behalf of the wider industry. Information is a fundamental issue.
Karen, I was just going to say, Julie, just to pick up on that, we did an event earlier in the year where we did measure the overall footprint of the event. South Pole supported us in doing that, and to pick up on Lee's point around the lower carbon menus, we consciously looked at those and compared the ones for the event to a 2019 equivalent, and just by employing some of the principles that we're starting to look at and have begun rolling out, we achieved a reduction of 66%. And to Lee's point, it wasn't, we've got really talented chefs, but they would also be here saying it wasn't because they performed any particular magic. It was just based on really understanding the footprint carried with the different ingredients and making some switches. So I think, those are the kind of things that practically need to be shared. But I just thought that was relevant in the context of, it is not an easy thing to do. It can be done, but I think it's about just making sure that you're looking at the right information with the right people. And yeah, it's not an off the shelf quick fix, Julie, I totally agree.
And to one of the questions in there about whether the small changes can make a difference, actually our modelling showed that it could. Actually, we just need some of those incremental changes to add up, and we can get to the kind of level of action that we need. We've got 2 minutes, and there were a few questions on the food waste side actually, and I wondered maybe Simon or anyone else to pick on it. How have you been delivering against food waste objectives, given that that's an important contributor?
Yeah, no, sure. So, I mean, Karen, you've already touched on sort of the benefits of tackling food waste. It's not just, the embodied carbon in the products themselves. You've got the transportation of the food products and the waste element as well. So in Sodexo, we are in the process of deploying our Waste Watch powered by Lean Path program. So it's something we've had in the business for a few years now, but aggressively going through the deployment to track food waste at all of our food sites by 2025. So essentially the technology, so the tablet, the Lean Path piece will enable us to track our food waste, understand the reasoning behind why that was created, to really then, have the data analytics and, analysis to then provide us with the MI information really to then take some behavior changes to start reducing, the food waste. And what we've seen over the last 12 months is we've had it deployed in around 230 sites, but actually really understanding the pre and post consumer food waste that we're creating, we've actually been able to prevent over 280 tons of food waste. It's the equivalent of around sort of 500,000 meals. So we're really starting to see that, having that information available can really sort of help, inform our operatives to make that step change. So that is, I guess the key program we're deploying at the moment. So we'll continue to deploy that at the rest of our food sites over the coming years.
Thanks, Simon. And I'm afraid we have run out of the time for our panel. I knew this would go so quickly. It's such an interesting bunch of people with so many brilliant insights to offer. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to hand back to Julie Hill for now. And I was just saying that thanks so much for the questions that have come in. We'll capture them and we'll share responses to anything that we haven't been able to cover.
Okay, thank you, Karen, very much indeed. Brilliant discussion, and I really hope This has given our participants here a sense of the tools available to you, the practical experiences of colleagues in the sector, and a way to take the first steps, which is quite often the hardest bit. So we're going to finish with another poll, if we could have that up. So having listened today, perhaps you could just tick which of these statements you identify with, and again, you can do more than one. And I'm hoping we might have some results, which is looking very positive indeed. So it looks like our webinar has certainly achieved the objectives that we wanted to achieve. So really, it just remains for me to say thank you so much to our RAP team, but also, of course, to all the many organisations who collaborate with RAP. We could not make a difference without you. We've heard from a lot of those organisations today. Thank you to all the speakers, all the panellists, and all of you as participants. I really hope you'll look at this again for resources on the Guardians of Grub website. Please join us in being Guardians of Grub, and we will also send out an email to everyone to see where and how we might be able to be of further help to you. So with that, I want to wish everyone a really good evening and a really good festive season. Thank you for joining, and I really hope this helps you move forward. Thank you.